Warning: mature content of self-harm and suicide are discussed. It didn't matter whether Tate's family was related to Tate by blood. Regardless of whether they had stood in his mother's hospital room when he was a baby, if they had held him, comforted him, let him sit on their lap, or been a constant presence in his life, Tate considered them family, but he didn't mourn them. A godfather. A person entrusted with legal responsibility for him. A mother or father figure. Uncles and grandparents. Someone who had been there during the most important moments of his childhood. Those losses always affected him deeply. When an aunt died, when a grandparent passed away, when someone who had been woven into the fabric of his life was suddenly gone, I saw what happened to Tate. Poor Tate. He never truly grieved. Not because he didn't care. Not because the losses didn't hurt. The opposite. They seemed to hurt so much that he didn't know what to do with the pain. Tate had spent so much of his life suppressing his emotions that grief became something he couldn't process. He couldn't sit with it, he couldn't release it, he couldn't put words to it. He simply buried it. Every loss was packed away somewhere inside him, untouched and unresolved. Maybe it was his arrested development. Maybe it was the way he had learned to survive by shutting down whenever emotions became too overwhelming. But Tate had never mourned anyone properly. He had never allowed himself to fully feel the pain of losing the people he loved. Instead, he carried it. And eventually, all that buried grief had to come out somehow. Sometimes it came out physically, through anger, through breaking something with his metal bat, through an explosion of emotions that seemed far bigger than the moment itself. Other times it came out through his body. The stress became too much and he would emotionally regress, lose control, or experience seizures. Watching him now, I wondered if all those years of unprocessed grief had been waiting underneath the surface. Tate wasn't someone who felt nothing. Whatever he felt was so deeply held beneath the surface that those nearest to him were unaware it existed. He was someone who felt too much and had never learned how to let himself feel it safely. And when Tate went to funerals or memorial services, that was when the contrast became the most unsettling. He didn't cry. He didn't break down. He didn't appear visibly devastated, the way everyone expected someone to react when they lost a person they loved. Instead, he often seemed almost relieved that the uncomfortable waiting was over, the long silences, the condolences, the heavy emotions that filled the room. To those who didn't understand him, it appeared to be indifference. When Tate's grandfather died, he was only 3 years old. I hadn't known Tate then, but Talia had told me the story many times. During the service, Tate had laughed. Not a small nervous laugh. A genuine laugh that made people turn and stare. It had made everyone uncomfortable. Terrence had struggled to understand it. He wondered how his own son could appear so detached during a moment when everyone else was grieving. At times, he questioned whether Tate understood empathy at all. But over the years, I began to wonder if everyone had been looking at the wrong thing. Maybe Tate's problem wasn't that he didn't feel. Maybe it was that he couldn't show it. He never mourned in a way people recognized. He never cried when people expected him to. He never expressed the compassion or sorrow that everyone assumed should naturally appear. And because of that, people filled in the blanks themselves. They saw coldness. They saw cruelty. They saw someone who didn't care. But I had seen the other side of Tate. I had seen how deeply he was attached to people. I had seen how much losing someone could affect him, even when he refused to acknowledge it. The grief wasn't gone. It was buried. And that terrified me. Because Joey was the person Tate loved most. Regardless of the 20 years Tate and I had shared together or the intimacy of our friendship, it was never the same as what existed between him and his blood uncle. Joey had known Tate from the very beginning. He had sat Tate on his lap when he was a toddler, bouncing him on his knee like he was riding a horse. He had scooped him into his arms, swung him through the air like an airplane, tickled him until he couldn't breathe from laughing, and pretended to drop him upside down before catching him at the last second. Those were formative memories, woven into Tate's earliest understanding of love, trust, and safety. Even with all the tenderness, loyalty, and sentiment that grew between Tate and me over 2 decades, it could never compete with the weight of someone who had been there since his earliest childhood. That bond was built long before I entered his life. No amount of time between us could erase the significance it held for him. Joey was the person who had been there since the beginning. The mentor who had shaped his life in ways no one else could. So what would happen to Tate emotionally when Joey was gone? How would Tate survive losing the one person he had spent years loving, resenting, needing, and fighting against all at once? I had seen what happened when Tate experienced overwhelming emotional pain. Every time grief became too much, his body seemed to find a way to escape it. The seizures. The personality changes. The moments where it felt like he became someone completely different. It was as if his mind was trying to protect him from emotions he had never learned how to carry. And I was terrified that his losing Joey would be the grief Tate could no longer outrun, or worse, Tate wouldn't deal with it and it would cause his life to implode. Noah made his way toward the garage. It had been several minutes since he'd heard anything from Tate and he wanted to check on him. He also needed to let him know that Susie was on her way over so he wouldn't be caught off guard when she arrived. The garage door creaked open with a low, ominous groan. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the concrete floor. Noah stepped inside, his heart still buzzing from the anticipation of Susie's arrival. But the air felt wrong, heavy, thick with a dread that prickled the hairs on his neck. The space was dimly lit, cluttered with half-forgotten tools and boxes stacked like silent sentinels, the faint metallic tang of oil hanging in the stagnant air. He scanned the room, expecting to find Tate tinkering with his bike or lost in thought, but what he saw froze him in place 10 feet from the workbench. Tate stood rigid, his back to the door, body taut, tense like a bowstring pulled to breaking. His eyes were squeezed shut, mouth agape in a silent scream that twisted his features into something unrecognizable, raw, unhinged. In his right hand he clutched a revolver, the barrel pressed coldly against the pale skin of his throat, just below the jawline where his pulse throbbed visibly. Noah's breath caught, an icy vice clamping around his chest. What the hell was this? Tate's finger hovered on the trigger and then click. A hollow, deafening snap echoed off the walls, followed by a guttural scream that ripped from Tate's throat, raw and animalistic, like a soul being torn apart. Noah's mind reeled, time stretching into an eternity of terror. Was the gun loaded? How many chambers? His legs felt leaden, rooted to the spot as Tate pulled the trigger again. Click, another scream, higher pitched this time, laced with a manic edge that sent chills racing down Noah's spine. The third pull, click, the scream devolved into a choked sob, Tate's free hand clenching into a white-knuckled fist at his side. Noah's heart hammered wildly, visions flashing unbidden. Blood spraying across the garage wall, Tate crumpling lifeless to the floor, their 21 years of friendship ending in a spray of red. No, this couldn't be happening. Tate, the boy he'd wrapped around in bed for years, the one whose secrets weighed like anchors, reduced to this. The fourth click shattered something inside Noah, a fourth scream piercing the air like shattered glass. Tate's body jerked with each empty chamber, shoulders heaving, sweat beading on his forehead and trickling down his temple. He was wound so tight, every muscle coiled, veins bulging in his neck as if one wrong breath, one faltering heartbeat might snap him in half. Noah's mouth went dry, his own screams trapped in his throat. 5 click scream! The wail turned frantic, echoing in the confined space like a trapped beast. Each mechanical snap was a thunderclap in Noah's ears, each cry a knife twisting deeper. The garage seemed to close in, the shadows deepening, the air suffocating. Was this the end? Had Tate's hidden torments, the jealousy, the denial, the family curses finally broken him? 6 click, the sound morphed into a desperate howl. Tate's body sagged slightly, the gun trembling in his grip but still pressed to his skin. It was Noah's worst fear brought to life, a world in which Tate no longer existed. The mere thought of Tate ending his own life and leaving him behind was unbearable. It would turn the world cold and colorless, draining every joy from it until everything tasted like ash. Life would become hard, hollow, and impossibly empty. It didn't matter that Tate didn't love him back in the way Noah wished he would. Noah still wanted him in his life, whether as a buddy, a brother, a roommate, or simply the person he could always count on. The shape of their relationship had never mattered as much as Tate's presence. As long as Tate was alive, Noah could accept whatever place he held in his heart. A world without Tate was unimaginable to Noah. It felt cruel, almost unlivable. If Tate died of natural causes, Noah knew exactly where he would spend the rest of his life. He would sit beside Tate's grave for hours each day, his back resting against the weathered headstone or his arms wrapped around the cold stone as though he could still hold on to him. On the hardest nights, he imagined curling up beside the grave and falling asleep there, refusing to leave the one place that still felt close to Tate. He couldn't bear the thought of sleeping in a world that no longer contained him. The only place that would ever feel peaceful again would be wherever Tate was laid to rest. Whether his grave rested beneath a quiet hill, beneath the shade of an old oak tree, or in the middle of a cemetery surrounded by dozens of other headstones, that would become Noah's sanctuary. He would visit every day. He would sit in the silence, tell Tate about everything that had happened, laugh at old memories, apologize for things left unsaid, and imagine the replies he wished he could still hear. The cemetery would no longer feel like a place of endings to Noah. It would become the only place where he still felt connected to the person he loved most, and he would return again and again simply to be near him. If something ever happened to Tate, Noah knew he would continue living. He would still have his friends, his career, his business, and the hobbies that had always filled parts of his life. He would get up each morning, fulfill his responsibilities, and keep moving forward because life would not simply stop. But it would be unimaginably difficult. It would feel as though the world had shifted from color to black and white. The small moments that once carried excitement, the anticipation of a new day, the unexpected laughter, the feeling that something wonderful could happen at any moment would lose their brightness. Tate had become woven into the fabric of Noah's everyday existence. His presence brought a sense of energy and meaning that Noah had never fully realized until he imagined it gone. Without him, life would still continue, but it would feel quieter, heavier, and emptier. Noah would survive, but he knew he would always notice the missing colors. Noah would miss the little pieces of life that had become inseparable from Tate. He would miss falling asleep beside him every night, the familiar comfort of his presence, the warmth of another person being there at the end of the day. He would miss the simple acts of affection that had become natural between them, rubbing Tate's shoulders when he was tense, pressing his fingers against his temple when a migraine took over, knowing exactly how to bring him a little relief without needing to be asked. He would miss seeing Tate's clothes hanging in the closet, the quiet evidence that he belonged there. He would miss the ordinary intimacies they shared, reaching for the same things, using each other's forks without thinking, the comfort of being close enough that boundaries between their lives had almost disappeared. Those small routines would become reminders of everything that had been lost. Noah had no idea how immense the emptiness would feel if Tate were no longer there. Tate had become an anchor in Noah's life. He centered him in ways Noah hadn't always known how to explain. When Noah's thoughts became overwhelming, when his fears grew louder, Tate had a way of calming the storm. His presence created balance. The world felt steadier when Tate was beside him. Tate quieted the chaos inside Noah. He softened the fears that Noah carried and gave him a sense of stability that he struggled to find on his own. Without Tate, Noah imagined life would still move forward, but the balance would be gone. The person who had always helped make the world feel manageable would no longer be there to share it with him. So, when Noah stepped into the garage and was confronted with the sight of Tate looking as though he no longer wanted to be alive, every coherent thought abandoned him. Pure panic surged through his body, drowning out everything else as his heart lurched into his throat. Noah couldn't take it anymore. The world narrowed to a pinpoint of horror, his vision blurring with hot tears. "Tate," he yelled, his voice cracking like brittle ice as he lunged forward, feet pounding against the cold floor. He reached Tate in 3 strides, hands flying out to seize the gun. Tate's eyes snapped open at the contact, wild and unfocused, his body jerking violently as if electrocuted. Noah wrenched the weapon free, fingers brushing the warm barrel, and hurled it outside the garage door with all his strength. It clattered across the driveway, skittering into the grass like a venomous snake fleeing danger. Tate whipped around, face ashen, pressing a hand to his chest where his heart must have been thundering. "Jesus, Noah," he snapped, voice sharp and breathless, eyes flashing with irritation. "You don't sneak up on people playing Russian roulette, that's not funny." Noah's world tilted. "Don't!" he screamed, the word exploding from him in a torrent of raw fear and anguish. He grabbed Tate's body, sobbing uncontrollably, arms wrapping around him in a desperate vice, pulling him close as if to shield him from the abyss. Tate's frame was still rigid, trembling under Noah's grip, the scent of gun oil and sweat clinging to his shirt. "Don't harm yourself, please, Tate, God, no." Tate's body went slack for a split second, then he started laughing, a low, disbelieving chuckle that built into something jagged and unhinged, echoing off the garage walls. Noah pulled back just enough to stare, confusion warring with the terror still churning in his gut. Laughing, after that? I was playing Russian roulette, you sweet blonde idiot, Tate said, wiping at his eyes though the mirth didn't reach them. His gaze was haunted, shadowed. Empty chambers, all of them. I'm not trying to hurt myself, just blowing off steam, testing my luck. Stupid, yeah, but not suicide. The words hit Noah like a physical blow. Russian roulette? Testing luck? Hysterical sobs tore from his chest, tears streaming hot and unchecked down his face. He collapsed against Tate, fists bunching in his shirt, body shaking with the force of his breakdown. You pulled the trigger 6 times, screaming like that. I thought you were gone," Noah wailed, thinking the love of his life was trying to kill himself by ending it all. "After everything, the bed, the secrets, how could you scare me like this? I can't lose you, Tate, not like that, not ever." Tate's laughter died abruptly, his arms coming up to envelop Noah, holding him tightly as the blonde sobs racked his compact frame. The rigidity melted away, replaced by a gentle firmness, Tate's hand stroking Noah's back in slow, soothing circles. Noah wrapped his entire body around Tate, his arms and legs pulling him close as if holding on tightly enough could keep him from slipping away. He was terrified, not just scared, but consumed by the realization that the person he loved was in so much pain that he no longer wanted to be here. Noah's entire body reacted before his mind could catch up. He was overwhelmed, shaken, and almost unable to process what he was seeing. Every part of him was screaming that something was terribly wrong. The sound of Noah's cries was raw and unrestrained. They weren't quiet tears or a simple expression of sadness, they were the cries of someone who believed he was about to lose the person who mattered most to him. In Noah's mind, the worst thing imaginable was happening right in front of him, and he felt completely powerless to stop it. All he could do was hold on to Tate, desperately trying to remind him that he was not alone. Tate understood, even through his own despair, what Noah must have been feeling. If Tate truly believed there was nothing left for him, Noah would inevitably see it as some kind of failure, as though he had somehow not done enough, loved enough, or been enough to keep Tate from reaching that point. But Tate knew that wasn't the truth. Noah had spent years trying to bring happiness into his life, trying to give back even a fraction of what Tate had given him. Noah had always wanted Tate to feel valued, wanted, and safe. The thought that Tate could still feel hopeless made Noah believe he had failed the person he cared about most. Noah pressed himself against Tate, his face finding Tate's chest as though he needed proof that he was still there. He rested his ear over Tate's heart, listening to the steady rhythm beneath him. That sound, the heartbeat of the dark-haired boy he loved, was the only thing grounding him in that moment. Noah was completely overwhelmed. He was crying uncontrollably, his whole body trembling with fear and relief, clinging to the simple evidence that Tate was still alive and still with him. For Noah, that heartbeat meant everything. It was a reminder that Tate was still here, that there was still time, and that he wasn't ready to imagine a world where that sound was gone. Hey, Noah, I'm sorry, I didn't think, I wasn't. Fuck, I'm an idiot, come on, breathe, I'm right here, not going anywhere. His voice cracked, the bravado crumbling as he rocked them both, the garage's chill seeping in but doing nothing to cool the heat of Noah's tears soaking Tate's shoulder. Noah clung harder, hiccuping through the cries, the terror uncoiling slowly in Tate's embrace. Noah could barely get the words out. Every sentence broke apart between choking breaths, hiccups, and sobs. His voice trembled as he held on to Tate, terrified that if he loosened his grip he might lose him. "Promise me you'll never do that again," Noah whispered through his tears. "Not that way, not anyway, never." He swallowed hard, struggling to breathe as his emotions overwhelmed him. "If you ever feel that depressed, that unhappy, that hopeless again, I'll help you, we'll get you help. You don't have to do it alone, you never have to do it alone." Noah's cheeks were streaked with hot tears, his face flushed from crying so hard. He looked completely broken, not because he was angry with Tate, but because the thought of losing him had shaken something deep inside him. "I couldn't bear it," Noah whispered. "I couldn't bear having to go to your funeral." The words nearly collapsed under the weight of what they meant. Tate looked down at Noah, at the sweet boy he had spent his childhood with, the person who had become such a permanent part of his life that he couldn't imagine the world without him. There was nothing dramatic or performative about Noah's plea. He wasn't trying to make Tate feel guilty. He was simply a terrified person begging someone he loved to stay. He held on to Tate, tears still falling, asking the one thing he needed most to hear. "Please promise me you'll stay." Tate nodded against his hair, his own eyes stinging. "I promise, no more roulette, just us like always." They stood there, locked in the dim light, the discarded gun a forgotten shadow outside as the breakdown gave way to fragile comfort, two boys mending the fractures of fear with nothing but each other. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I didn't mean to scare you, Noe." Noah sniffled and wiped his nose on Tate's shirt before freezing for a moment, realizing what he had done. "Sorry," he mumbled, his voice still thick from crying. But then he remembered who he was apologizing to. Tate had never been the kind of person who cared about something as small as a ruined shirt. Their relationship had always existed beyond those little things. Noah could probably spill something on Tate's clothes, use his shirt as a makeshift tablecloth, or make some other ridiculous mistake, and Tate would barely blink. That was who Tate was with him. For years, Tate had waited for Noah to show him that he mattered. 6 years of trying to get a reaction out of him, trying to make Noah notice him in any way he could. Sometimes Tate had brought home girls, sometimes he had pulled away, sometimes he had acted like he didn't care just to see if Noah would finally show some sign that losing him would hurt. He had wanted proof that he meant something. But today was different. Today, Tate wasn't trying to provoke Noah. He wasn't trying to make him jealous, wasn't trying to force a confession or pull some hidden emotion out of him. He was dealing with grief, family, and the weight of things he had carried for too long. And somehow, without trying at all, he had finally seen it. Noah was holding on to him like he was the most important thing in the world. Noah was crying, shaking, and begging him not to disappear. He wasn't saying it because he was afraid of being alone or because he wanted something from Tate. He was saying it because the thought of losing Tate was unbearable. Tate knew he shouldn't feel a small sense of relief or happiness in a moment like this. Someone he loved had just been in so much pain that they had considered the only option was to prevent Tate from inflicting personal bodily harm. But a tiny part of him, one that had spent years wondering if Noah truly cared, felt something warm. For the first time, Tate didn't have to guess. He didn't have to analyze Noah's words, search for hidden meaning, or wonder whether he mattered. Noah was showing him. And as painful as the moment was, Tate finally understood just how deeply Noah loved him. Noah slowly pulled away from Tate, though he still stayed close enough to make sure he was really there. He wiped at his eyes with the hem of his own shirt, trying to collect himself after the wave of fear and emotion that had completely overtaken him. "The reason I came out here was to let you know about Susie," Noah said, his voice still unsteady from crying. "I'm really glad I did." He gave a shaky breath, trying to add a little humor because it was the only way he knew how to come back from the edge of panic. "Don't ever do that again, seriously. Don't play Russian roulette or risk your life for cheap kicks." Noah shook his head, wiping another tear from his cheek. "Because if I see something like that again, I swear my blood pressure probably went up to 260. The exaggeration was obvious, but the fear underneath it wasn't. Noah wasn't angry at Tate. He was shaken because he had gotten a glimpse of a world where Tate might not be there anymore, and the thought had nearly broken him. Even while trying to lighten the moment, his eyes stayed fixed on Tate, silently making sure he was still okay. I hesitated, then added, "I called Susie, she'll be here in about half an hour. I thought, maybe she could distract you a bit, you're really tense." I reached out and touched Tate's shoulder out of instinct. He flinched away as if I'd burned him. "Don't touch me." The words landed harder than I expected. "Since when?" I asked quietly. "You always." "Sorry," Tate said, his voice softer as he corrected himself. The anger and panic that had been in his tone faded, replaced by exhaustion. "I'm just dealing with a lot of stuff right now. When people touch me, sometimes it feels like I'm being trapped in a cage, like I can't breathe and I just need space." He looked away, clearly frustrated with himself. "I didn't mean to yell at you, I'm just so tense. Everything feels like it's closing in and I don't always know how to handle it." Tate took a slow breath, trying to steady himself. "Just give me a few days, won't you?" Noah and Tate walked from the garage into the living room of the Green Rambler as Tate sat down on the couch, his hands moving on his thighs. The request wasn't meant as a rejection. It was the only way Tate knew how to ask for room to process everything without pushing away the person who was trying hardest to be there for him. I swallowed. You're upset about your uncle. Don't even say it, he snapped, spinning away from me. His hands were shaking now. I cannot believe that bastard, that selfish, useless asshole. He laughed once, sharp and humorless. Of course he'd pick my birthday, of course couldn't have told me a week ago, had to drop his mess on my one fucking day. He dragged a hand through his hair. You only turned 25 once. Great timing, really stellar. I hope he's in such pain in the next few months that they have to give him morphine. That'll teach him to fuck with children's hearts, Tate spat while thinking of Joey. Tate, I said gently, you don't mean. Oh, I mean it, he said, his voice breaking through the anger for just a second. He crushed the hopes of a kid, he abandoned me. Joey fucked me over as a naive little kid whose hopes and innocence were destroyed when I waited at the window as a kid and he didn't show. He shows up when it's convenient for him and expects what, absolution? He shook his head, breathing hard. I gave him years, I waited, and he didn't care. I stepped closer, careful this time not to touch him. You're hurting, I said, but wishing him pain isn't going to make this easier. He stared at the wall, eyes glassy. Why shouldn't I be angry? Why shouldn't I feel this? You're allowed to, I said softly, just don't let it eat you alive. He didn't answer, he just stood there, shoulders rigid like he was holding himself together by force alone. That bastard, that fucking asshole bastard, he said, it's just like him ruining my birthday every year with his selfishness. Don't talk about Joey that way, Noah said gently. He wasn't defending every choice Joey had ever made and he wasn't ignoring Tate's pain. He could see the hurt written all over Tate's face. But Noah also knew the man Tate was talking about, the man who had shown him kindness when he didn't have to. He may have his faults, Noah continued. He may be selfish sometimes, but he was one of the warmest, sweetest, most down-to-earth people I've ever known, and Tate, he wouldn't hurt a fly. Noah paused, choosing his words carefully. If he ever let you down or if he ever took you for granted, I don't think he did it because he wanted to hurt you. He was never cruel to me, he was gentle, he was kind, he was like a big teddy bear. Tate's expression tightened, but Noah kept going. Please don't be angry with him because of me. Joey never tried to steal me away from you, he never replaced you with me, and even if he had tried, I wouldn't have let that happen. Noah looked directly at him. Anything that made you uncomfortable, anything that made you feel pushed aside or forgotten, I would have stopped it immediately. He sighed softly. He was your favorite uncle, I know that, and honestly I was lucky he even considered me family, that he saw me as his nephew, but I never tried to become his favorite, I never wanted to take your place. Noah's voice lowered. He loved you, Tate, I know things are complicated, I know you're hurt, but please, forgive him someday if you can. He shook his head slightly. I'm not telling you what to do, it's your choice, but you might regret it later if you let all of this anger be the last thing you carry about him. Someday, when the anger fades, you might realize you had a chance to leave things differently, not as friends maybe, but as family, as relatives who mattered to each other. Tate looked away, his jaw tense. I'm not forgiving him, he said firmly. Then his expression shifted just slightly. But maybe I don't have to wish him agony on his last day. He gave a bitter, humorless laugh. That's more than he'd ever do for me. Tate stood up, his emotions still raw. I know you're trying to help, Tate said quietly. His anger had softened, replaced by exhaustion. He leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to Noah's cheek, a small gesture that showed he wasn't rejecting him, only setting a boundary. You mean well, you really do, you want what's best for both of us. Tate looked away for a moment, struggling to explain something that felt impossible to put into words. But this is one of those things I don't want to talk about with you or him. He took a breath. You didn't have an uncle you were close to when you were a kid. You don't know what it's like to have someone who was part of your world from the beginning, someone who was there before you understood anything about life, and then suddenly they're just gone. His voice became quieter. Joey may have seemed like an uncle to you, and I'm not saying he wasn't important to you. I know he cared about you, I know you have your own relationship with him. Tate paused. But it's not the same. You didn't grow up with him having your name, being part of your family history, being someone you assumed would always be there. A surrogate uncle can mean something. A person can love you and matter to you, but it doesn't erase the difference between that and someone who was there from the very beginning. He wasn't saying it cruelly, He was saying it like a painful truth he needed Noah to understand. I'm not trying to be mean, I'm not saying your relationship with him doesn't matter, I'm just saying it's different. Tate's expression hardened again as the hurt resurfaced. If Joey doesn't call you or doesn't send you a letter, that's sad, it hurts, but if it's your actual uncle, the person who was supposed to be part of your life forever, it's different. He shook his head. I don't want to talk about this anymore. Tate looked at Noah, his expression apologetic despite the firmness in his voice. And if my uncle calls before whatever happens, however it happens, I don't want messages passed along, I don't want updates, I don't want to talk to him. The words hung heavily between them. Then Tate turned away, picking up what he needed before heading outside for target practice, leaving Noah behind with the difficult understanding that some wounds were too deep for someone else to heal. Now I'm going to go shoot some bottles and imagine they're my uncle. Noah stared at him, unsure whether to be concerned, frustrated, or relieved that Tate had managed to make a dark joke at all. Tate retrieves his gun from the outside path by the front door and reloads it before he aims at a few glass bottles on their back fence. Susie's presence at our home 20 minutes later seems to take the edge off, at least enough to get Tate back inside after his 10,000th round of target shooting. Tate didn't say a word. He walked straight through the living room, took one look at his birthday cake on the table, and then turned sharply and went upstairs. A second later, his bedroom door slammed hard enough to rattle the walls. I exhaled slowly. How is he doing? Susie asked. I shook my head, very tense like a coiled wire. I hesitated, then tried to joke weakly. For a second out there, I thought he was going to shoot me. He was playing 6 rounds of Russian roulette earlier in the garage. I paused. I'm not kidding. She gave me a look. Don't joke about that. Then, softer but still serious, I'm not. I'm just glad there wasn't a dog or a cat anywhere nearby. I've never seen someone that angry, and no, that's not okay even if he's hurting. I frowned. I've never seen him like that either, at least not since. I trailed off. Since you denied him something after you moved out the first time, she asked gently. I nodded. Yeah, he gets this angry when I sleep alone. She studied me carefully. Please tell me he wasn't actually loading anything when you slept in the spare room before Brown. No, I said quickly. He shoots inanimate bottles and targets outside the house, but never when I'm outside the Rambler in the yard. She sighed, rubbing her temples. Noah went on, he's not a psycho, Susie. She nodded, but some of what you described, that's either a trauma response, an arrested development meltdown, or psychotic rage. Rage like that doesn't come out of nowhere. I leaned against the counter. Joey warned me yesterday that Tate could hurt me. He told me to leave Tate alone before something happens to me. Why do uncles do that? I muttered. Hurt their nephews, disappear for years, then show up like everything's supposed to be fine. Because some people are assholes, Susie said plainly. I let out a hollow laugh. I should know, my mom was one. She glanced at me. And your dad? I don't really remember him. He died when I was 3 and I don't know how and why he died, but sometimes I envy him that he didn't have to go through my entire childhood putting up with my alcoholic, blame their child mother. I don't know if he was a good man. Mom never talked about him. I consider Talia my mother because at least she never passed out on the couch, I said quietly. Was my father a good man? Who knows? Was he an asshole? Probably. Susie reached out and squeezed my hand. None of this is your fault, and none of it makes Tate a bad person. It just means something old got ripped open after Joey's cancer announcement. Tate had gone upstairs minutes before I could hear the music rattling the upper floor where our bedrooms were, but he made no effort to quiet the noise or control his emotions. I looked toward the stairs, hoping for once that Tate could act his age. Noah sat there quietly for a moment after Tate left, still trying to process everything that had happened. I heard what Joey said, Noah tried to explain to Susie. And I understand why he's worried. I'm not saying Tate's behavior is always okay, and I'm not trying to excuse the things he does when he's angry. I'm not trying to explain away his problems or enable anything unhealthy. Noah paused, trying to find the right words. But I've spent years around him, before Brown, during Brown, and after. I've seen him at his worst. I've seen him angry, overwhelmed, and scared. He looked down for a moment. And yes, there have been times when he's hurt me emotionally. There's no denying that. Some of the things he said or did because he was confused about himself and because he didn't understand my feelings caused damage. Noah sighed. But physically, no, he has never hurt me. He shook his head. He's grabbed onto me when he was afraid I was leaving. He's pulled me back when he was desperate for me not to walk away. There have been moments where he held on too tightly where I had to tell him, Tate, let go, or that hurts. And the second I said something, he stopped. Noah's expression softened. He never ignored my boundaries once he understood them. He never wanted to injure me. Susie listened carefully as Noah continued. I know he can look intimidating. To everyone else he's this ruthless businessman who seems impossible to read, but when we're alone he's different. He's gentle. Honestly, he reminds me so much of Joey in that way. Noah took a breath. I'm not saying Tate is perfect. If he ever did hurt me physically or in a way that crossed a line, I would leave, I would protect myself, and I would report it. I wouldn't stay in a situation that wasn't safe. He looked toward the stairs where Tate had disappeared. But I don't believe Tate is a physical danger to me. I believe he's someone who is carrying a lot of pain and doesn't always know what to do with it. Noah's voice lowered. And if he knew some of the things I haven't told him yet, I honestly think his first instinct would be to try not to hurt me. He might be angry, he might be upset, but I don't think his goal would ever be to destroy me. He looked back at Susie. I know you're trying to protect me. I know Joey was trying to protect me too, but I also know the person I've spent all these years with. I know the difference between someone who scares me and someone who is hurting. I hope so, Susie said while drinking her cappuccino at Noah's dining table. Then he heard movement upstairs. At first it was faint, the sound of footsteps, things being shifted around, but then it became louder. He could hear banging coming from Tate's room, the unmistakable sound of someone moving around with more force than necessary. Noah's chest tightened. He knew Tate well enough to recognize the difference between ordinary frustration and the kind of anger that came from being overwhelmed. This wasn't just irritation, it was painful looking for somewhere to go. For a moment, Noah debated whether to go upstairs or give him the space he had asked for. Tate had been clear that he felt trapped when people crowded him, that he needed room to breathe. But every instinct in Noah wanted to make sure he was okay. He stayed still, listening to the sounds above him, feeling the weight of knowing that Tate was carrying something much heavier than anger. Beneath the banging and the frustration was grief, confusion, and years of emotions that Tate had never known how to set down. I just don't know how to help him. She met my eyes by doing exactly what you're doing, staying but not letting him take you down with him. A few minutes later, the upstairs of their house didn't settle, it erupted. The first sound was wood splintering, not an accident, deliberate, something rigid snapping cleanly in half, followed by the dull thud of it hitting the floor, then another, and another. Picture frames, shelves, anything Tate could get his hands on, he was breaking them over his knee as they'd personally betrayed him. Then came the sound that made my stomach knot. A hollow, echoing crack, a baseball bat. He must have grabbed it from his room. The rhythm shifted. Heavy, controlled swings thudded into furniture, walls, and the bed frame. Wood groaned, metal rattled, glass shattered in angry bursts. It wasn't chaotic, that was the worst part. He was methodical, moving through the room, swinging, stepping, swinging again. A lamp went out, then the dresser. I heard something tear free from the wall and hit the floor hard enough to make the ceiling creak beneath our feet. Every strike sounded like punctuation, like he was finishing sentences he'd been holding in for years. Stomping, violent, relentless, crushed what remained, as if leaving anything intact was a mistake. Then a crash, not deliberate, a fall, something clattered, air knocked from lungs, sharp and breathless. Susie was already moving. She took the stairs 2 at a time and knocked hard on his door. Tate, are you okay? No answer, another heavy knock. Tate opened the door. Silence. Tate, she said, voice tightening, I have a key, don't make me use it. Still nothing, then she heard it, not the bat, not breaking. Breathing. Tate, she said, open the door. Silence. I'm not Noah, she added, you don't get to shut me out. A long moment passed, then the door opened a few inches. Tate stood there shirtless, hair damp like he'd dragged his hands through it too many times. His eyes were red, not glassy, not crying, just raw. I tripped over something, Tate said. Silence. He shut and locked the door, ignoring Susie and Noah completely. Before she could speak again, loud rock music blared to life, the door rattling as if it might shake loose from its hinges. "Turn off the music," Susie screamed. "Come out here so we can have a conversation." The music only roared on. After 10 minutes of pounding on the door, her fists aching, her voice raw, Susie finally gave up and went back downstairs. Even in the living room where Noah sat, the music thudded through the walls, relentless and unforgiving. "I told you," Susie said, sinking onto the couch. "He's emotionally avoidant. He's playing loud music up there so he doesn't have to talk to me. How do you deal with that?" she asked, perhaps with too much compassion, turning a page of the newspaper. Why was he breaking things upstairs? Noah sighed. "Who the hell knows? He's never done this before in our house." "Well, he does have a pattern. Whenever his family or guests come over, he kind of goes off the deep end. Too many people, too many faces in the room. It's always worse around Christmas or his birthday." A thud echoed faintly from upstairs, followed by the scrape of something being dragged across the floor, which interrupted our conversation. Susie flinched. Another crash, sharper this time. Glass, maybe. Susie shifted on the couch, unable to get comfortable. "But it doesn't make sense," she said. "Why now?" I didn't answer right away. The music upstairs pulsed through the ceiling, heavy bass, erratic, like a heartbeat out of control. "He's never reacted like this before," she went on. "Not like—" She stopped, listening. Another bang, something solid this time, furniture maybe. "What set him off?" she asked. "Did someone say something? Did I?" She turned to me, her eyes searching, urgent. "You don't just lose it like that for no reason. People don't start breaking things because they don't feel like talking." Susie folded the newspaper, slower than necessary. "Has he ever scared you?" Noah's jaw tightened. "No," he said immediately, then softer. "I mean, not him, just the way he shuts down, the way he disappears." Upstairs, the music cut out for a split second, long enough for a crash to ring through the house, then roared back even louder. Susie flinched hard this time. "What if it's not the stress or the news about Joey?" Noah whispered. "What if it's something else, something he's not telling me?" He hugged her arms to his chest. "What if he's been holding this in for years and it's just leaking out now?" He didn't finish the thought. Noah didn't have to. The question hung between us unanswered while the ceiling shook above our heads. Tate cranked the music even higher. The ceiling began to vibrate in time with the beat, dust shivering loose from the light fixture. "This is ridiculous," Susie said. "He's 25 and still can't regulate his emotions by now." "Obviously not," I said. "He never does this unless there are too many people around or if he's overly stressed." Susie stared at the ceiling. "Is this a meltdown?" Another bass drop rattled the walls. "Maybe we should call his Uncle Tim," she said. "Maybe he could talk to him." Susie hesitated. "I don't know if Tate wants anyone to know about this." "You might be right," I said. "If he comes through the ceiling, I'm going to lose it." Susie let out a short laugh. "Tate just has to work it out of his system," he said. "That's what Terrence used to say. Tate usually leaves the house when he wants to scream." Susie's smile faded. She didn't look at Noah. "Screaming isn't normal," she said quietly. "You might want to think about taking him to a psychologist." "I asked him to go 2 years ago," I said. Susie looked at me, and he flatly refused, told me to mind my own fucking business. Her eyes widened. "He said that to you?" "Yeah," I said. "It's one of 3 occurrences since we've met that he's ever told me to mind my own business." Noah sighed as he talked to Susie. "Tate usually apologizes almost immediately when he crawls into bed," Noah said. Susie looked at him curiously. "What do you mean?" "When he says something rash or insensitive, something he doesn't really mean, he catches it. And honestly, he doesn't really do that anymore. But if something comes out wrong, if he says something that isn't very nice, he almost always stops and fixes it. He'll rephrase what he said, explain what he meant, or apologize." Susie nodded slowly. "That's the thing that's strange," Noah continued. "He doesn't apologize to anyone else, not like that. He can be stubborn with other people, he'll defend himself or just move on, but with me, he makes sure I know he didn't mean to hurt me." Noah shook his head slightly. "I don't know why it's different with me, but it is. He cares about how I take his words. He cares if he's hurt me, even when he didn't intend to." Susie studied him for a moment. "You realize that says something, right?" Noah looked at her. "What?" "That he values your feelings differently than he values most people's." Noah was quiet for a moment. Yeah, he said softly, I guess that's what I keep noticing. The music thundered on above us, louder than before, carrying something older with it now learned, repeated, and left unresolved. Around dinner time, Tate finally came downstairs. He'd showered again and changed his clothes. He acted as if nothing had happened. He walked up behind me, slipped his arms around my shoulders, and kissed the top of my head. Evening, he said lightly. Susie froze mid-spoonful of cereal. Slowly, she lowered the bowl and stared at him. Tate wrapped his arms around Noah's shoulders from behind. I caught myself a Noe. Noah burst out laughing. A what? Noah asked, smiling. A Noe, Tate repeated proudly, holding on tighter. I caught one. Noah shook his head, still laughing. You caught me. Yes, Tate said, completely serious. You're right here. Noah laughed again, unable to help himself at Tate's playful confidence. You know I'm not exactly something you catch, right? Tate smiled. I don't know, seems like I did. Noah just laughed and leaned back into him, letting himself enjoy the ridiculous little moment. For all the complicated things they had been through, moments like this reminded him how naturally Tate could bring warmth and humor into his life. I caught myself a Noe, Tate repeated, like he had made the greatest discovery in the world. Apparently you did, Noah said, still laughing. Well, Susie said, eyes flicking over him, if it isn't Paul Bunyan, she nodded toward his shirt. You were wearing something else earlier, why are you dressed differently? Tate shrugged, does it matter? Aren't we going to talk about why you almost came through the ceiling? Susie asked. There's nothing to talk about, he said easily. The room went very still. I'm going out for a while, Tate continued, already backing toward the door. I'll be back in an hour. I've got some things to drop off and I'll pick up a few videos at Blockbuster. Noah, we can watch a movie once I get back. I stared at him, my mouth hanging open. Then I looked at Susie. We shared the same look, the disorienting feeling that we'd slipped into an alternate reality where Tate hadn't had a meltdown, hadn't shaken the ceiling, hadn't broken something upstairs that I still hadn't worked up the nerve to check. We need to talk about this, I said. Tate didn't slow down. There's nothing to talk about. Tate leaned to kiss Noah's temple before walking toward the front door of the Rambler. I'll see you in an hour, he added, already opening the door. And then he was gone, leaving behind a house that still felt bruised, humming faintly like it hadn't quite stopped shaking. The door clicked shut behind Tate. For a moment, none of us moved. I'm going to look, Susie said finally. Her voice was steady, but she didn't meet my eyes. She climbed the stairs slowly, each step louder than it should have been. I followed a few paces behind her, the house suddenly too quiet without the music. At the top of the stairs, she hesitated. The hallway smelled faintly of soap and something metallic underneath it. He showered twice today, huh? She said. The bedroom door was open. Inside, everything was neat. The bed was made. The dresser drawers were closed. No shattered glass, no overturned furniture. Susie frowned. She crossed the room, running her fingers along the edge of the desk. Nothing. That's not possible, she said. Then I saw it. The closet door hung slightly crooked, the hinges bent just enough to notice if you were looking for damage. Inside, the clothes were packed too tightly, jammed together like they'd been shoved back in a hurry. A single hanger lay snapped in half on the floor. Susie crouched and picked it up. Her hand shook. The clothes Tate had been wearing the day before on his birthday weren't in the hamper or anywhere in the house. This was solid wood, she said, staring at the dresser he beat apart with the metal bat on his floor. In the bathroom, the mirror was intact, but a spiderweb crack spread from one corner, carefully wiped clean of fingerprints. The trash can was heavier than it should have been. I didn't open it. Susie leaned against the sink, eyes fixed on her reflection. He cleaned it up, she said. She didn't say the rest. That meant he'd had time, that he'd been calm enough to hide it, that the mess hadn't disappeared, it had just been erased. Downstairs, the front door felt like it was already miles away. He put everything that was broken or ruined in his closet, Susie said. He has a huge fucking closet. She looked at me. Did you see that? I saw it, I said, and then I opened the door all the way. The smell hit first. Wood splinters, rubber, something sharp and chemical. Inside were piles, too many piles, things I recognized immediately, things I had bought. A lamp snapped clean in half, picture frames smashed, the glass missing but the photos still inside, bent and creased. Shoes torn apart at the seams, the soles peeled back like they'd been clawed, a sweater twisted, stretched, and stomped flat. It wasn't messy, it was contained. Does he throw tantrums like this sometimes? Susie asked carefully, and then act like everything's okay. Not like this, I said. Not for a few years. He hasn't had one in front of me since I returned from my mom's funeral 3 years ago. I swallowed. He only gets like this around Christmas or his birthday, then he's fine. The rest of the year, March and December, for some reason he just breaks. Susie shook her head. This is the first time he's ever broken anything in the house. She paused. What did he break in December? I didn't answer right away. I got a bill in the mail, I said finally. He took a 4x4 to his car, his own car, had to replace the lights, some of the fenders, and repaint the whole thing, and he stabbed a few of the tires. Susie stared at me. I tried to talk to Tate about it, I continued. He said there was nothing to talk about, claimed he'd accidentally run off the road. I laughed once, sharp and hollow. I don't know what kind of car accident causes stab wounds similar to a knife's. That wasn't an accident, Susie said. No, I said, it was intentional damage. He lied to me. She frowned. Why didn't you tell me? Because he told me I didn't know what I was talking about, that I couldn't let myself think like that. I pulled the folded bill from my pocket. I had this in my hand, and he looked at me like, what's the big deal? I hesitated, then said it anyway. Are you sure he's not delusional? Susie asked. I straightened immediately. No, absolutely not. There's no way someone like him is loony. Maybe Tate lied so he doesn't have to think about something or face uncomfortable feelings, but he's not crazy. She nodded slowly. I didn't mean crazy, I said. He's breaking things, hiding the evidence, lying about it, and pretending it never happened. I think he might need to talk to someone about it. The closet door creaked softly behind us, packed tight with what he didn't want anyone to see. What's wrong with him? Susie asked. The question wasn't sharp, it was tiring, almost pleading. I hesitated. I went to a psychologist a few years ago while at Brown, I said. It was to manage my own symptoms while dealing with a hazel-eyed, jealous, obsessed, and territorial childhood buddy. Susie glanced at me, surprised I'd never mentioned it before today. That was after I found out about Tate's borderline personality disorder, aka BPD, I continued. I asked Talia and my doctor if someone with his condition could have rage episodes. The kind where they break things. Susie didn't interrupt, she just listened. My doctor said yes, I said, that it happens. There's actually a term psychiatrists use for it. I swallowed. She called it borderline rage. The word seemed to change the air in the room. Susie looked back at the closet, at the packed shelves, the crushed and hidden things. So you're saying this isn't random? I'm saying it's not nothing, I replied. She wrapped her arms around herself, but he's not violent. I chose my words carefully. He hasn't been violent toward people unless you count the times he strangled Mark on my porch, or when Joey mentioned on Tate's 19th birthday that he hospitalized Linus, his godfather. But Tate only gets violent when he believes somebody is trying to steal me away. Tate promised me he wasn't going to become physically violent toward people who showed interest in me, and since the Mark situation he hasn't hurt anyone. I know what happened wasn't just some random moment of anger. It was 5 years of resentment, insecurity, and silence building up until he finally snapped. That doesn't excuse it, but it does matter because he understands now that he cannot ever let himself get to that point again. I told him clearly that if something like that ever happens again, we're done. I mean that. I would rather he break a stupid object, a vase, or slash one of his own tires than ever put his hands on another person. None of those things is acceptable, but hurting someone is a line he cannot cross. I'm not letting up about therapy, Susie. I know I can't force him into it, and I don't want to give him some empty ultimatum because those usually don't work. But I do need to start being honest about how much this affects me. I need him to understand that my hesitation isn't because I don't care about him, it's because being close to someone who chooses destruction instead of getting help scares me. Maybe if he understands that therapy isn't just talking about what happened in the past, but about how safe and comfortable I feel around him, he might realize therapy isn't a punishment, it's a way to prove he wants to be better. Susie didn't answer. Somewhere between us sat the unspoken thought that rage doesn't need a witness to be real and that breaking things can be practice for something else entirely. I've never heard of borderline personality disorder, Susie said quietly. What is it? Is it something that can be treated? Can it be cured? Noah looked at her for a moment before answering. Borderline personality disorder, or BPD, is a mental health condition that affects the way someone experiences emotions, relationships, and their sense of themselves. It's not what a lot of people think it is. It doesn't mean someone is dangerous, and it doesn't mean someone is a bad person. Most people with BPD are not violent. They're people who often feel emotions much more intensely than others and can struggle with managing those emotions when they become overwhelming. Susie nodded, listening carefully. People with BPD can experience very strong fears of rejection or abandonment, Noah continued. Sometimes their emotions can change very quickly. A person might feel loved and secure one moment, then suddenly feel terrified that they're going to be left, betrayed, or replaced. That fear can feel completely real to them in that moment, even if the situation doesn't match the intensity of the feeling. So where does the anger come from? Susie asked. That's where people sometimes hear the term borderline rage, Noah explained. It's an intense emotional reaction that can happen when someone feels deeply hurt, rejected, threatened, or overwhelmed. It's not just being angry. It's like the emotional alarm system goes off at full volume. The person may feel panic, shame, fear, and anger all mixed together. They can say things they regret or react in ways they normally wouldn't. He paused. But it's important to understand something. Having BPD does not make someone violent. The disorder itself does not cause someone to hurt people. Most people with BPD are far more likely to turn that pain inward than to harm someone else. When someone does act in a harmful way, they're still responsible for that behavior. A diagnosis can explain why something happened, but it doesn't excuse it. Susie looked thoughtful, so it can be treated. Yes, Noah said. Absolutely. BPD is one of the conditions where people have made some of the biggest improvements with the right treatment. The main therapy is called dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT. It teaches people skills to regulate emotions, tolerate distress, communicate better, and recognize when they're getting overwhelmed before they reach a breaking point. Can it be cured? Noah considered his words. The word cure is complicated with mental health. It's not like treating an infection where you take medicine and it disappears, but people can and do recover. Many people with BPD no longer meet the criteria for the diagnosis after years of treatment. They build stable relationships, manage their emotions, and live normal, fulfilling lives. So someone isn't just stuck like that forever? Susie asked. No, Noah said firmly. They're not, but they do have to be willing to work on it. They have to take responsibility for their actions and learn healthier ways to handle those intense emotions. Loving someone with BPD doesn't mean accepting harmful behavior. Compassion and boundaries have to exist together. Susie nodded slowly. So the person matters more than the diagnosis. Exactly, Noah said. A diagnosis can help us understand someone. It should never be used as a reason to dismiss them or as a reason to excuse them. If people with borderline personality disorder don't get the help, treatment, and therapy they need, if they never learn how to regulate their emotions, fears, and reactions, could they become unbalanced? Susie asked. Noah nodded thoughtfully. They can struggle more, yes. When someone has intense emotions and doesn't have the tools to manage them, their reactions can become more extreme. Their fears can feel bigger than they really are, and they may misinterpret situations through that emotional lens. But that doesn't mean they become dangerous. That's one of the biggest misconceptions about borderline personality disorder. Susie looked at him, because movies make it seem that way. Exactly, Noah said. A lot of movies and shows portray people with BPD as unstable, dangerous, or obsessed. The classic example people bring up is Alex Forrest from Fatal Attraction. She's become one of the most famous fictional examples people associate with borderline, but she's also an extreme fictional character written for a thriller. Those cases are very rare, and they're usually much more complicated than just one diagnosis. When someone displays extreme behaviors like that, there are often other factors involved too. So borderline by itself doesn't mean someone is going to become violent? Susie asked. No, Noah said, not at all. Most people with borderline personality disorder are not violent. They're people dealing with overwhelming emotions, deep fears of rejection, unstable self-image, and difficulty calming themselves when they're distressed. In many cases, their pain is directed inward. They're more likely to punish themselves, blame themselves, or hurt themselves emotionally before they ever hurt another person. He paused. Borderline rage is real, but people misunderstand what that means. It doesn't mean someone suddenly becomes a different person or loses all humanity. It's an intense emotional reaction usually connected to feeling abandoned, betrayed, rejected, or terrified. The person may feel an emotional storm that they don't know how to control, but having that emotional storm doesn't automatically mean they're going to attack someone. Susie was quiet for a moment. So what about Tate? Noah sighed. Tate isn't dangerous because he has borderline personality disorder. That's not how I see him. He's more like someone whose emotional wiring is turned up extremely high and who never learned what was happening inside him. He feels things intensely, but he doesn't always understand why he feels that way or where those reactions are coming from. He doesn't even know he has it, Susie said. No, Noah replied, and that's part of the problem. Without understanding himself, he's been trying to navigate emotions that feel confusing and overwhelming. But a diagnosis isn't an excuse. If someone realizes they have a problem, they still have a responsibility to work on it. Learning emotional regulation, learning coping skills, and getting therapy are what make the difference. Susie nodded slowly. So, the goal isn't to label him as dangerous, it's to help him understand himself. Exactly, Noah said. The disorder explains some struggles. It doesn't define who he is. Tate is still Tate. He's still responsible for his choices, his actions, and how he treats people. But understanding what's happening in his mind could be the first step toward him learning how to handle those emotions in a healthier way. Susie scratched her head. Why doesn't he know he has borderline personality disorder? Was he diagnosed as a child and nobody bothered to tell him once he became an adult? How does something like that even happen? Noah let out a slow breath. His mom, Talia, got the diagnosis when he was 16. She never told him. Susie's eyebrows shot up. She never told him. No. But why? Because every time Tate was diagnosed with something growing up, he didn't handle it well. Noah rubbed the back of his neck. When he was diagnosed with arrested development at 16, he completely unraveled. He started taking bigger risks than he already had been. He'd throw himself into walls when he was furious with himself. A few times he climbed onto the roof and jumped off the house. He was lucky he walked away with bruises instead of a permanent injury. Susie stared at him in disbelief. She thought he might die if doctors diagnosed a fourth medical condition, Noah continued. It was more like he didn't know what to do with the emotions he was feeling. Everything exploded outward. He'd do reckless things without thinking about what could happen afterward. So Talia was scared, Susie said quietly. She was terrified, Noah answered. She honestly believed that if she told him he had another diagnosis, especially one as misunderstood as borderline personality disorder, he might spiral again. She worried he'd blame himself, convince himself he was broken, do something impulsive, and accidentally kill himself or leave himself permanently disabled. He looked down for a moment. I'm not saying her decision was right or wrong. I understand why people disagree with it. Adults generally have a right to know their own medical information, but I also understand why she made the choice she did. She wasn't trying to deceive him because she didn't care. She was acting out of fear. She genuinely thought she was protecting her son. Susie was silent. Borderline personality disorder is one of the most stigmatized mental health diagnoses there is, Noah continued. A lot of people hear the word borderline and immediately picture a violent stalker, a manipulative ex, or some movie villain. That's not what most people with BPD are like, but those stereotypes are everywhere. So she was afraid he'd believe those stereotypes about himself. Exactly. Noah sighed. She worried he'd hear the diagnosis and think, I'm dangerous, I'm crazy, I'm never going to have a normal life. She was also worried about what other people would think if they found out. The company, Susie asked. Noah nodded. Tate has spent his entire life being raised to eventually lead the family company. Talia worried that if word ever got around that the future CEO had borderline personality disorder, people wouldn't look at his abilities, they'd look at the label. Whether that's fair or not, stigma is real. She was afraid it would follow him for the rest of his career. So she chose to keep it from him. She did. Noah folded his arms. Maybe one day he'll be angry that she never told him. Maybe he'll understand why she made that decision. I honestly don't know. That's between Tate and his mother. He looked at Susie. What I do know is that if he does have borderline personality disorder, finding out isn't the end of his story. It could actually be the beginning of understanding why some things have always felt so much harder for him than they seem to be for everyone else. Susie nodded slowly, letting everything Noah had said sink in. Noah spoke again. Talia did tell me one more thing. She said she's only keeping it quiet while he isn't in therapy. Susie looked up. What do you mean? She told me that if I can get Tate into therapy, if he starts working with someone, learning emotional regulation, understanding his reactions, and building healthier coping skills, then she's open to having the conversation with him about the borderline diagnosis. So she isn't planning on hiding it forever. No, Noah said, shaking his head. That was never her intention. Her concern isn't the diagnosis itself, it's when he hears it. He leaned back in his chair. Right now, Tate doesn't have the tools to process something like that. He doesn't understand why his emotions can become so intense, and he doesn't know how to slow himself down when he's overwhelmed. If he learned he had borderline personality disorder today, before learning any coping skills, Talia worries he'd see it as proof that there's something fundamentally wrong with him. Susie nodded, whereas if he's already in therapy, then he'd have someone sitting across from him who could explain what it actually means, Noah finished. Someone who could answer his questions, challenge the myths he's probably heard, and remind him that a diagnosis doesn't define him. He'd also be learning skills to regulate his emotions instead of trying to figure everything out. That makes more sense, Susie admitted. Exactly, therapy would give him a foundation first. Then, when he learns about the diagnosis, it becomes information, not a catastrophe. Noah sighed. Talia's hope is that he'll eventually hear, "You have borderline personality disorder," and instead of thinking, "My life is over," he'll think, "So that's why some things have been so hard. Now I know what I'm working with." That's a very different place to receive news like that. He smiled faintly. I don't know if her approach is the right one. There are good arguments that adults should know their diagnoses as soon as possible. There are also situations where timing matters because someone isn't emotionally equipped to process difficult information yet. Talia made the decision she thought would keep her son safest. Whether it was the best decision is something only Tate and his family can sort out. Susie was quiet for a long moment. The ideal situation, Noah said, is for Tate to already be in therapy when he finds out. Susie tilted her head. You mean have his therapist tell him? Noah nodded. That's what I think would be best. During one of his therapy sessions with his therapist there, his mom there if she's comfortable being there, and me if Tate wants me in the room. That way, he isn't left alone to process something that big. He sighed. When he found out about his arrested development diagnosis, he completely lost control. He screamed, threw things, and lashed out at himself because he didn't know how to cope with what he was hearing. I don't want him reliving that experience. So you want professionals there in case it overwhelms him, Susie said. Exactly. If he gets upset, there's someone who knows how to help him regulate those emotions instead of everyone just panicking. They can explain what the diagnosis actually means, answer his questions, and remind him that it isn't a life sentence. That's a much healthier environment than him hearing it at home with no support. Noah looked down for a moment. Joey said something to me during one of his last visits that stuck with me. He admitted that, as parents, they didn't always get Tate the help he needed. He said Talia was so afraid of making things worse that sometimes she froze instead of pushing through the difficult conversations. He shrugged. Parents make mistakes, they love their kids but they're human, sometimes they make decisions out of fear instead of certainty. Joey seemed to realize that toward the end. Susie nodded thoughtfully. So now you're trying to do what they couldn't. I guess, Noah admitted. I'm just hoping I can convince Tate to take therapy seriously. If he does, maybe he'll finally get some answers about himself. Maybe he'll stop thinking he's just wired wrong and start understanding why certain things have always been so difficult for him. He let out a small, tired laugh. Of course. What? Getting Tate to do anything he doesn't already want to do is like pulling a bicuspid. Susie laughed despite herself. I've noticed. He's one of the most stubborn people I've ever met, Noah said, smiling. If he decides he doesn't need therapy, he'll come up with 50 reasons not to go. Every one of them will make perfect sense to him. So how are you going to convince him? Noah smiled faintly. I don't think I can convince him by arguing. I think the only chance I have is being honest. Telling him that I care about him, that I want him in my life for a long time, and that therapy isn't about changing who he is. It's about giving him the tools to make his life easier. He looked at Susie. If he believes I'm saying it because I love him instead of because I think he's broken, maybe he'll listen. Tate came back an hour later with a stack of movies from Blockbuster. They were all bright, cheerful titles, smiling covers, pastel colors, happy heterosexual families, frozen mid-laugh, mid-hug, mid-life that works. He looked better, not just a calmer reset. His shoulders were loose, his face open, like the tension had been scrubbed out of him in the shower along with the steam. There was no trace of the man who'd shaken the ceiling earlier that day like a toddler trapped in an adult body. He stopped in the doorway. Noah and Susie immediately looked a little too innocent. Tate narrowed his eyes. What are you two plotting? Susie tried not to smile. Noah chuckled, nothing. Bull, Tate pointed one of the VHS cases at him. Every time the two of you get quiet, you're plotting. Noah laughed. Okay, maybe a little. Tate set the tapes on the counter with a clatter. So, Noah hesitated for only a second. I think you should talk to somebody. Tate blinked. About what? Your anger, your rages, maybe a psychologist around town. We could find someone who's a good fit. Tate stared at him as though he'd suggested growing a second head. I don't want to shrink thinking I'm some broken psycho. Without missing a beat, Noah stepped forward and slipped both arms around Tate's waist. Tate. He rested his forehead against Tate's shoulder. You're not broken. Tate didn't answer. Honestly, Noah continued softly, I think everybody should be in therapy at some point. Look at everything people go through. Families aren't perfect. Parents make mistakes. Life throws things at us constantly. It's honestly amazing any of us make it into adulthood without carrying around baggage. Tate's expression softened just a little. I'm serious, Noah said. I've been in therapy since Brown. You have? Tate asked, surprised. Noah nodded. I have, and Susie's been in therapy since she was 7. Susie shrugged. My parents thought it would help me after everything our family went through. It did. Tate looked back and forth between them. So, both of you? Yep, Noah said. There isn't anything shameful about therapy. It's not something you do because you're crazy, it's something you do because you're human. He gave Tate's back a reassuring rub. A good therapist can help you understand yourself better. They can help you learn why you react the way you do, teach you healthier ways to deal with stress, and even help shape the kind of life you want for yourself. It's one of the healthiest investments a person can make. Tate frowned thoughtfully. I don't know. What? The last thing I need is some stranger digging around inside my head. Noah smiled. I get that. I don't need someone analyzing every weird thought I have. They're not there to judge you. They'll probably think I'm nuts. They've heard everything, Noah said with a laugh. I promise you're not going to surprise them. Tate rolled his eyes. You make it sound so easy. No, Noah admitted. The first appointment usually isn't easy. Walking through the door is the hardest part. He squeezed Tate a little tighter. I'm not trying to pressure you. Tate gave him a skeptical look. You've been talking about this for weeks. I know. And you don't let things go. I know. You are absolutely relentless. Noah grinned. Guilty, it would please me if you'd think about it. He looked up at Tate. Tate was quiet. No promises, Noah continued. No deadlines, no ultimatums, just think about it. If after you've really thought about it you decide you want to pursue therapy, we'll find someone together. If not, we'll have another conversation another day. For several seconds, Tate simply looked at him. Then he let out a long sigh. All right. Noah blinked. I'll think about it. A smile spread across Noah's face. Really? Really? Tate smirked. If I decide I want to pursue it, I'll bring it up. Noah's smile grew even wider. Thank you. Tate laughed and shook his head. You know, you're like a dog with a bone sometimes. I've been called worse. I'll bet. Tate leaned forward, kissed Noah gently on the cheek, and picked up his stack of Blockbuster tapes again. You are impossible. And yet, Noah teased, smiling after him, you still keep me around. Tate snorted. Barely. Now move your butts, it's movie night, he said lightly, setting the cases on the table. Thought we could watch something fun. I stared at him, waiting for the crack, the apology, an acknowledgement, anything, nothing came. The next morning, 2 men arrived with a truck. Tate told them to take the garbage from his closet. He stood in the doorway while they hauled out black bags and broken things, my things, like it was a routine cleanup as the mess had appeared on its own. When I finally brought it up, when I asked why he needed to break things, he looked genuinely confused. I wasn't angry, he said. I almost laughed. You weren't angry. He shook his head, calm, reasonable. No, you're reading into it. Who was he kidding? He spoke like someone narrating a different reality, one where ceilings didn't vibrate, closets didn't fill with wreckage, tires didn't get stabbed, and bills didn't arrive in the mail like quiet accusations. He acted perfectly fine. Too fine. like this version of him had stepped in to replace the other one entirely. I couldn't tell which was worse, that I was being gaslit or that he truly believed his own version. Either way, the message was the same: nothing was wrong. And if nothing was wrong, then the problem had to be me. Susie watched him the way you watch a stranger who knows your name. During the movie, Susie smiled when Tate smiled, laughed a beat too late at his jokes, and nodded along as if everything he said made perfect sense. But her eyes kept drifting back to his hands, clean, steady, folded loosely in his lap as they'd never wrapped around anything in anger. "You look better," she said finally. "I feel fine," Tate replied. "Easy. Told you nothing was wrong." Susie's smile faltered for half a second before she caught it. "Right, of course." He slid one of the Blockbuster cases across the table. A glossy family stood on the cover, all teeth and warmth. "This one's supposed to be really good," Tate smirked. Susie picked it up, turned it over, then set it back down carefully, like it might break if she wasn't gentle enough. "You don't remember yesterday?" she asked. Tate frowned just slightly. "Remember what?" The room seemed to shrink. Susie glanced at me, then back at him. "The music, the noise, She stopped herself. "Never mind." Tate relaxed instantly. "See, nothing worth digging up." Susie nodded, but she didn't look convinced. She tucked her feet up under herself on the couch, making herself smaller. Her shoulders stayed tight, like she was bracing for impact that never came. Halfway through the movie, a character on screen raised their voice. Susie flinched. Tate didn't notice, or pretended not to. He laughed at the right moments, passed the popcorn, and reached for her hand like this was any other night. She let him hold it, but her fingers stayed stiff, her pulse visible at her wrist. When the credits rolled, Tate stretched and yawned. "Good choice," he said. Susie swallowed. "Yeah," she replied, but she didn't look at the screen. She was watching Tate, quiet, careful, like she was trying to memorize this version, just in case it vanished again. Susie waited until the movie ended and the room settled into that soft, artificial quiet the TV leaves behind. "Can I ask you something?" she said lightly, eyes still on the blank screen. Tate glanced over. "Sure." She nodded once, like she was steadying herself. "When you get overwhelmed, when things build up, what helps you calm down?" He didn't hesitate. "I don't get overwhelmed." The answer came too fast. Susie turned to face him, keeping her voice even. "Okay, then what helps you relax?" Tate smiled. "I relax just fine, you worry too much." She smiled back thinly. "Probably." A beat passed. "I was thinking," she said carefully, "maybe next time the house feels loud we could just take a break, step outside, go for a drive together." Tate shrugged. "There's no next time." Susie's fingers tightened in her lap. "Right, I just mean in general." "You're making something out of nothing," he said gently, not unkind, almost reassuring. Susie studied his face. "Do you remember Christmas?" Tate's smile didn't disappear, but it changed. "Of course." "You passed out after doing many impressions of Joey," she said. He chuckled. "I just wasn't in the mood to stand up that night. That's allowed, isn't it?" "Of course," she said quickly. "I just want to understand you better." Tate reached over and squeezed her knee. "There's nothing to understand." The touch was warm, familiar, normal. Susie nodded. "Okay." But when he looked away, her expression didn't soften. She wasn't reassured, she was cataloging. During the 3 months of Joey's declining illness and his time in hospice, he and Noah spoke often. They grew even closer during those final months. Noah wanted to fly to Phoenix and spend time with Joey in the hospital, but Joey refused. "No," he told him gently. "I want you to remember me as the sexy, attractive, charismatic uncle you've always known, not as the shell of a man this disease has turned me into." Noah respected his wishes. Instead, they talked on the phone almost every evening, and Joey left Noah voicemails whenever he didn't answer. Those conversations became something Noah looked forward to, even as he dreaded what was coming. Every night before he went to sleep, Noah wondered if that would be the night the phone rang. He knew that sooner or later someone would call to tell him that his favorite uncle had died. And God help whoever had to tell Tate. Joey called Tate once just a few weeks after his birthday, then he called again and again. Tate never answered. He never returned a single voicemail. Noah didn't push the issue or even bring it up. Tate had made himself perfectly clear. Whatever had existed between him and Joey was over. He was done with his uncle. And that was that. 12 weeks after Tate's birthday, Uncle Joey died on June 12th. Tate heard the bad news by phone in his bedroom before he retired to bed due to a seizure. It wasn't the kind that shattered the room or sent people running for an ambulance. It was quieter than that, contained, almost controlled in the way his body tightened and then gave in. By the time it passed, it left him drained more than anything else, like something inside him had short-circuited and taken the rest of him down with it. Afterward, Tate didn't get up. He stayed in bed for a day, maybe two. It was hard to tell. Time flattened out in that room, the curtains half-drawn, light slipping in and out without meaning anything. He barely spoke. When he did, it was short, one-word answers, if that. Mostly he just lay there staring at nothing, like he was waiting for his body to reboot or his mind to catch up with what had already happened. People checked on him, he knew that. Voices came through the door, soft and careful, like they were afraid he might break if they spoke too loudly. Maybe they weren't wrong, but Tate didn't cry, rage, or ask questions. It was as if the seizure had taken whatever reaction he might have had and burned it out of him before it ever surfaced. If grief was there, it wasn't visible. It sat somewhere deeper, buried under the same pressure that had made Tate's body give out in the first place. Tate knew, not in a way he could explain, just a pressure in his chest, a static in the air that made everything feel slightly off. When the call finally came, it didn't shock him. It confirmed something his body had already started bracing for. After 2 days of lying on his bed, Tate stood up and left his room. Tate grabbed his keys and then left Noah for the afternoon until he returned to sleep beside the blonde in their bedroom, which they both shared. After the seizure, something fundamental in Tate seemed to go quiet, not just his voice but the part of him that once reached outward. Where he had been sharp-edged and reactive, there was now a strange stillness, like a storm that had burned itself out and left only ash. He spoke less, and when he did, his words felt measured to the point of strain, as if each one had to be pulled through something thick and resistant before it could exist. Silence followed him from room to room, settling into corners, filling spaces where laughter or irritation used to live. He avoided conversations without making it obvious, stepping around them with subtle deflections or abrupt exits. Eye contact became rare, fleeting when it did happen, as though it cost him more than he was willing to spend. When pressed, when someone tried to push past the distance, he didn't retreat so much as harden, his responses turning clipped, defensive, sometimes sharp in ways that felt out of place, like echoes of the person he used to be but stripped of heat. The arguments weren't loud anymore. They were colder, quieter, and somehow more final. Sleep abandoned any rhythm it once had. Some nights he didn't sleep at all, packing or sitting in the dark with no clear purpose, while other times he disappeared for long stretches, unreachable and heavy with exhaustion. There was no consistency, no sense of rest, just a cycle that seemed disconnected from the rest of the world. Mornings didn't bring renewal, they simply marked time passing. Even his movements had changed. Everything he did felt deliberate but empty, like he was following instructions only he could hear. The small, unconscious gestures that once gave him away, the restless tapping, the quick shifts in posture, the flashes of emotion were gone. In their place was something controlled, almost mechanical. He moved through spaces quietly, efficiently, leaving little trace of himself behind, as if he were trying not to exist any more than necessary. To anyone who knew him before, the difference was unmistakable. It wasn't just grief. It was as though something inside him had shut a door and locked it, and whatever remained on the outside was only a version of Tate going through the motions, hollowed out and unreachable. The Tate I'd known my entire life. The boy from preschool with scraped knees and loud laughter, and the man he grew into, confident, magnetic, impossible to ignore, both of them seemed to vanish in that stretch of time. One was buried with the past and the other faded right in front of me, leaving behind someone I could still recognize but no longer truly reach. After Joey left our house, Tate couldn't look at me for a month. Not once, not directly. He moved around me like I was something fragile or dangerous, something he didn't trust himself to touch without consequence. The only exception was the bed we still shared, those quiet, unavoidable hours where distance wasn't possible. Even then he kept to his side, turned away, breathing steady but never quite at ease. Outside of that, he avoided me with a precision that felt intentional, like he'd mapped out every way to exist without crossing paths. It felt like something in him had died and stayed gone, and somehow my face, my presence, was tied to it. Like I was a reflection he couldn't bear to see, a reminder of something he lost or something he couldn't undo. Joey's funeral service was set for June 15th. Tate's parents, Uncle Tim and Linus, would attend the funeral, as would 500 of Los Angeles' finest. There were too many faces, too much history, too many reminders of everything Tate had spent years trying to keep buried. Every person arriving felt like a test, a weight pressing down, a judgment waiting to be made. And Tate knew deep in his bones that surviving the week ahead would take more than composure. It would take strategy, control, and every ounce of fury he could summon. The morning of the funeral, Tate slept away from our house. He wanted time to himself, and I had no issue with his choice. Over the phone, Tate said he'd meet them there. He needed a minute. By the time the funeral came, he got up because he had to, not because he was ready. He left at 6 in the morning, and I didn't see him until noon when the service started. Susie didn't argue. She'd learn not to. Joey had committed suicide before the worst of the cancer symptoms emerged. Tate must have known because the closed coffin had been buried the night before the funeral, as requested by Terrence, and Tate hadn't said a word all week. At the cemetery, people filled the seats, whispering, hugging, and crying softly into tissues. Susie sat alone in the row reserved for family, feeling every empty inch beside her. Andrew, Anna, Jack, Mark, and Bree sat 2 pews behind Susie, waiting to offer any support to Tate once he arrived. The cemetery service lasted about an hour. Tate never arrived. Afterward, everyone who had been invited made their way to a nearby church for the memorial service. The pews were filled with people, friends from Joey's years in business, lifelong family friends, neighbors, and relatives who had come to pay their respects. One by one, people stepped up to the podium to share memories of Joey, reflecting on his life, his generosity, his sense of humor, and the legacy he had left behind. Susie's jaw remained clenched throughout the church service. She had watched every person file into the church, hoping that somehow Tate would appear at the last minute. He hadn't come to the cemetery. And now it was painfully obvious he wasn't coming to the memorial either. Talia eventually walked to the podium. Fighting back tears, she shared a few heartfelt words about her brother-in-law, remembering his kindness, his charm, and the joy he had brought to their family. When she returned to her seat, Terrence stood. Looking out over the crowded sanctuary, he spoke about everything Joey had accomplished during his 35 years of life. He talked about the successful career he had built, the friendships he had cultivated, and the impact he had made on everyone who knew him. For nearly an hour, story after story painted the picture of a man who had been deeply loved. But one person was noticeably absent. Each time the church doors opened, her heart jumped, then fell when someone not Tate arrived. The service was nice and very tasteful, reflecting Joey's charisma, professionalism, and dignity. Tate hadn't graced the funeral with his presence yet, but hymns were sung without him. Memories were shared. Joey's name repeated until it started to sound unreal. Susie kept glancing at the aisle, her hands clenched tight in her lap. Halfway through, during a pause meant for silent prayer, the doors creaked open. Tate stumbled inside, hair messed up, eyes bloodshot from rampant alcohol consumption. He looked like a truck had hit him and left the scene of an accident, calm, noticeably drunk. He looked like he had just stepped out for coffee and not missed half his uncle's funeral. He slid tipsily into the pew beside Susie without a word, his knee brushing hers. People's heads turned, not openly, just enough to be noticeable. Susie didn't look at him. Tate noticed Mark sitting 2 pews behind Noah. Tate put his arm around the blonde, sending a message that Mark could fuck off. Susie's chest burned with relief and something sharper underneath it. Tate bowed his head at exactly the right moments. Stood when everyone stood, sat when they sat. He knew the choreography. He was perfect. Too perfect. He wore an impeccably tailored black suit beneath a long black overcoat that fell past his knees. Every piece of it was expensive, understated, and flawlessly fitted. Even at his uncle's funeral, Tate looked like a fashion statement, drawing more than a few glances as he slipped into the back of the sanctuary. He didn't acknowledge anyone. He had missed the cemetery service entirely. But for reasons known only to him, he had come for the final 20 minutes. When the service was over, condolences blurred together. Someone clasped Tate's shoulder and said, "You holding up okay?" "Yeah," he replied easily, "I'm fine." He was wearing green sunglasses, which Tate never does. Tate prefers the shade of blue, his favorite color. Tate loves blue things. Tate's shoes were really dusty and dirty, and his hair smelled like cigarettes and burning wood, but Tate never smoked. Noah could smell the aroma of sex from Tate's body. Tate had sex before arriving at the funeral. Susie watched him say it, watched the lies slide out clean, and practiced when well-wishers talked to him or asked if he was all right. Outside, the June heat wrapped around them like a weight. Susie walked over to Tate and saw him standing by Noah. "Where were you?" she asked quietly once they were alone. Tate didn't hesitate. "I needed space. I had business to take care of, which is why I'm late." She nodded but was angry he hadn't arrived on time. The answer didn't satisfy her, but it never did. As they walked toward the car, she realized something that made her throat tighten. He hadn't avoided the funeral. He'd avoided the beginning, the part where grief was loud, the part where people might notice him crack. They were almost to the car when Tate's mother called his name. "Tate!" She stood a few feet away, sunglasses pushed up into her hair, her mouth set in that careful, public smile. When Tate stepped closer, Susie caught it, the odor of alcohol clinging to him. His mother caught it too, her eyes flicked to his face then away. "You missed the first half," she said sadly, not accusing, not surprised, just stating a fact. Tate smiled a little too easily. "Traffic." "Of course," his mother replied. She reached out and smoothed his sleeve, her fingers lingering like she was checking for balance. "I was wondering if you'd come at all." "I wouldn't miss it for the world," he said, his words just slightly rounded. "All my favorite people in this fucking world are here," Tate said sarcastically. She murmured, "You've always done better once things are already underway." Tate stiffened just a fraction. "I'm fine, Mother." Talia turned to Susie, lowering her voice. "Funerals can be hard on him," she said. "He has a way of taking the edge off before he walks into funerals." Susie nodded, unsure whether this was an explanation or an excuse. His mother squeezed Tate's arm. "Did you make it through okay?" Susie saw Dennis, the gardener, standing by the funeral flowers with a shovel. He was muttering about digging another hole for Joey because there had been vandalism at the gravesite the night before the funeral. He said that young people got freakier every generation and vandals should be buried alive for disrespecting the dead. "I'm fine," Tate said quickly, too quickly. She studied him for a beat, his flushed cheeks, the looseness in his posture, then nodded. "Good, that's what matters." As Talia walked away, Susie felt something cold settle in her stomach. This wasn't new, the lateness, the drinking before showing up, the way everyone pretended it was coping instead of avoidance. Tate only drank one cocktail at family events, but today he was drunk. Tate was holding a large yellow flat envelope the size of a photo frame, but he gripped it like nothing I'd ever seen before today. Tate didn't slow as he crossed the grass, his steps sharp and deliberate like momentum was the only thing holding him together. The gardener looked up, startled, dirt clinging to his gloves, the quiet of the church settling awkwardly around them. Tate held out the money. "White lilies," he said, voice loud, cutting clean through the stillness. "And white roses, all of them go on Joey's grave." The gardener blinked, glancing briefly past Tate as if someone else might step in, someone softer, but no one did. Tate didn't lower his hand. "Today," he added, more forceful, "not tomorrow, not later, today." He pressed the bills into the gardener's palm, then paused, pulling a few more from his pocket. The motion was quick, almost impatient. He stepped half a pace closer, angling his body just enough so Susie, standing a short distance away, couldn't hear. "The rest of the cash is—" Tate's voice dropped, the sharp edge of it dulling into something quieter, controlled. "For upkeep. I don't want a single dead stem out here. If something wilts, you replace it. If the weather ruins them, you fix it." His jaw tightened, eyes flicking once toward the headstone before snapping away again. "Keep it clean," he continued under his breath. "No weeds, no dirt, no vandals, nothing out of place. It stays perfect." He hesitated, then slipped a little more money forward, pressing it in firmly. "And this," he added, even lower now, "is to make sure no one messes with it. If anyone comes near it with the wrong intentions, you handle it. You call someone, you watch it, whatever it takes. I don't want it touched." There was a beat of silence, stretched thin. "I mean it," Tate said, quieter still, something raw flickering underneath the control. "No vandalism, no damage, nothing. I'll make sure no one touches his grave again." He pulled back slightly, then added almost as an afterthought, "And don't tell anyone I paid extra, just say you did your job." The gardener nodded quickly now, gripping the money tighter, understanding more from Tate's tone than his words. Tate straightened, stepping back, his expression resetting into something harder, louder, something Susie would recognize. "Make sure it's done right," he said again at full volume as the quieter moment had never happened. "I've already selected a headstone," Tate said calmly. "It should arrive next Tuesday and will be installed at my uncle's burial site." The gardener nodded. "Very good." "His plot is beneath the large oak tree," Tate continued. "It's one of the nicest locations in the cemetery." The gardener glanced down at the paperwork. The monument is rather large, Tate added. It may require more than one person to install it properly. That shouldn't be a problem, Dennis replied. We'll make sure we have enough staff available for the installation. Tate reached into his coat pocket and handed him a business card. If you need any additional assistance, he said, or if there are any unexpected installation costs or issues with the foundation, you can reach me directly using the number on that card. The gardener accepted it with a polite smile. Thank you, Mr. Blue. We'll contact you if anything comes up, but everything appears to be in order. Then he turned away before anyone could answer, before his eyes could betray him, before the name on the stone could pull anything else out of him he wasn't ready to show. Tate opened the car door, humming softly, like the day had gone exactly as planned. Ready? He asked. Susie got in beside him, the June heat pressing through the glass, and wondered how many times his family had mistaken survival strategies for stability, and how long she'd been expected to do the same. The Rambler house felt wrong when they got home, too quiet, too clean, like it had already decided to forget the day. Tate kicked off his shoes and headed for the kitchen. He acted like nothing was wrong and everything was perfect except that his favorite uncle had died recently and his nephew showed no emotion over his death. I'm starving, Tate said lightly. Noah, let's make a sandwich and watch some TV. No, Susie said. The word surprised them both. Tate stopped. No what? No pretending, she said. Her voice shook but she didn't soften it.